A warm welcome to this class, AX 301 Introduction to Agricultural Extension and Rural Sociology. I am Dr. Victor Otene, one of your lecturers for this course. In the course of this class, we will look at issues that surround communication. It may be a term that has been taken for granted, but we'll learn some one or two things about communication. Now, what is communication? Some people have believed that communication is derived from a Latin verb, communicare. Communicare means to talk together, to discuss, to consult one another, or to confer. Some others believe it is from a Latin noun, communis, which means to make common. Besides this, there are simpler definitions of communication. Communication can be defined as a means of sending messages, transmission of information, the situation in which a source transmits a message to a receiver with the conscious intent to affect the behavior of the receiver. Some other people will say communication is a verbal interchange of thoughts, while a key definition states that communication is a process which makes common to two or several people what was the monopoly of one or some. If I have a knowledge, if I have something in mind, it is my monopoly. The moment I make it known to some other persons, it means I am communicating. There are some other definitions of communication that may interest us. Rogers defined communication as an exchange of ideas between two or more individuals in an attempt to arrive at a convergence in meaning. What is convergence in meaning? It's a point where what the sender of a message has in mind is the same thing as what the receiver of the message gets. If the sender and the receiver are not having the same meaning for a message, it means that communication is not effective. So there are some other definitions of communication which we may not really look at in details now for the purpose of this class. What we may look at is the definition or the lines by which we can divide or we can classify communication. Communication can be looked at with respect to the technology involved. And in that case, we have two types of communication. We say communication can either be aided or it can be unaided. Aided in the sense that you are using technology to make the voice better or to amplify the voice to communicate. Unaided in the sense that you are not using any form of technology. It's a pure communication. Also, we can look at communication. For intercultural communication, you also have intracultural communication. That's communication within a culture and between cultures. One of the most common divisions of communications, however, is in line with the number of actors involved. So in this case, you have intrapersonal communication. This involves only one person. There are times when you need to talk to yourself. That is intrapersonal communication. You also have interpersonal communication, talking to some other persons, more of a face-to-face communication. That is interpersonal. You have group communication. If I can get people in a group and discuss with them, share ideas with them, we refer to it as group communication. And then there is mass communication. Mass communication deals with a large number of receivers, which is the general public in most cases, and mass communication is often aided. So we'll look at communication in better details. What are the elements in a communication process? We say there should be a source, there should be a message, and then a channel, a receiver, and then that message should have an effect on the receiver. We'll look at these elements briefly. Who is a source? A source is the person or the individual or the institution that is responsible for initiating the communication process. That is the person that generates the message that should be sent. No? So as a source, we expect that you'll be knowledgeable about what you want to share because you cannot give out what you do not have. What are the characteristics of a good source? So number one, you should have good verbal and non-verbal communication skills. People should be able to get what you are saying. both verbally and non-verbally. Also, the source should be knowledgeable about the subject matter. Like I said earlier, you do not teach what you do not know. You do not communicate what you do not know. Number three, we say the source should have a good understanding of the target audience in terms of their level of education, their culture, their beliefs, their norms, and things like that, so that you don't communicate beyond their level of understanding. You also do not communicate things that is against their culture or their belief, which will not be acceptable. Number four, we say the source should have a favorable attitude towards the information and towards the receiver. You should be pleased with what you are communicating. If you are not pleased, if you do not have a favorable attitude towards what you are doing, you will not be able to communicate effectively. And also, it is good to have a good knowledge of the limit of time so that you do not overload people with information. We call it information overload. When you give out excessive information beyond what the people could accept and process, it is referred to as information overload. So, as a communicator, you should have a good knowledge of the limit of your time so that you serve as a good source. In communication, the source of the message is referred to as the encoder because he is the one that encodes the message and transmits. So, what is the message itself? So, the message is a stimuli which the source transmits. And for a message to be of importance, it should be clear, it should be useful, it should be relevant, and it should also be timely. It should get to the persons at the time when the person would need them. If you communicate something important to somebody when the person doesn't need it, it would not make any sense. And then it should be technically feasible. You don't tell people what they cannot do. It should be economically beneficial, and it should also be acceptable to the values or to the culture of the people. These are considerations that should be made when a message should be selected. What are the components of a message? Number one, we say the message should have a purpose. What do you intend to achieve? It should have a content. What is contained in the message? How do you package your information? And then it should have a treatment. How do you display the information, or how do you communicate? How do you present it to the receiver? That is the treatment. So these are the major elements of a message: the purpose, the content, and then also the treatment. For a message to be valuable to a receiver, it has to do three things simultaneously. Number one, it should be understood by the receiver. If you do not understand the message, it makes no sense to you. Number two, it should be accepted by the receiver. You should be willing to pick that message. And then number three, it should carry the motivation to act upon that message. The person receiving the message should be able to act on it. So, for a message to be meaningful or to be valuable, it has to be understood, it has to be accepted, and then it has to motivate the receiver to act on it. What is the channel? The channel is the means by which the message gets to the audience. It could be written, it could be verbal, it could be non-verbal, it could be through demonstrations, through pictures, farm visits, home visits, office calls, newspapers, magazines, name them. There are different channels. It could be audio, it could be visual, it could be written, it could be audio-visual. All of these put together are different channels by which an information can get to the receiver. Who is the receiver, or who is the audience? It's the person for which the message is prepared, the person that receives the message, the person that is expected to act on the message. The receiver must be accepted by the communicator the way he is. And like we said earlier, the sender of the message should have a favorable attitude towards the receiver. And then we expect the receiver to be able to interpret the message, act on the message. That way, we can say communication is successful. So, what other aspects of communication do we look at? That is the feedback. If I tell you to sit down and you are still standing up, it means we have not communicated effectively. So, the feedback is how the receiver responds to a message. We try to measure feedback in three lines: the level of knowledge of the receiver, the attitude of the receiver, and then the skills of the receiver. We expect knowledge or information to improve the knowledge of the person receiving it. we expect to see a change in the attitude of the person receiving it, and then we expect to see an improvement in the skills of the receiver. All of these are the elements that come together when we measure feedback. We know if a message is properly received and processed by the receiver. There are things we'll look at which are theories of communication, and we'll just pick on one or two of them. We say a theory is a set of interrelated definitions and relationships that organizes our concepts or our understanding of our world. So a theory is just a tool for analysis and a way by which we can explain things that happen around us. Models are more of symbolic representations of structures or operations. The moment we have something in mind and we can create a structure, a symbol of what we have in mind, it means we are creating a model. Well, going into the communication models, we'll look at one of the models by Harold D. Laswell, who looked at information considering the sequence by which communication takes place. And then he stated it: number one, who says? There should be somebody saying. Number two, what is the person saying? Number three, in which channel is the person saying what he's saying? And number four, to whom is the person saying these things? If we put the who says what, in what channel, to whom, we arrive at a model that was derived or that was put up by Laswell. That model was worked upon and adjusted by Braddock. Yeah, it is good to know who is saying what and to whom and in what channel, but Braddock also believes that communication does not take place in a vacuum. We should pay attention to the person receiving the information, and added two key elements to what we have already studied. One, what is the effect of the communication? And then number two, in what channel does the information get to the person? Well, these are elements, models that have to do with communication. I think we looked at that of Braddock and also that of Laswell. There may be some other models. I am sure that you can read up models of communication. Yeah, we'll look at agricultural extension teaching methods. What are the methods by which an extension agent can communicate and send information across to the receivers of a message? These are the agricultural extension teaching methods, and I think we talked about them briefly when we were trying to classify communication. They are basically classified into three. There is the individual method, there is the group method or group contact, and then there is the mass method. Individual method often between individuals, things like farm visit, home visit, office calls, telephone calls, individual demonstration of results and of methods, personal letters you write to a receiver. These are individual methods of communication. Then there is a group method. You handle people in a group and you share information to them. Group method are things like result demonstration, method demonstration, team meeting, lectures like we have, group discussions, excursions, conferences, seminars, symposia, workshop, and all of them. These are the group methods, some of the group methods by which we can communicate. And then there is the mass media or mass contact, which include things like your electronic media, your radio, your satellite, internet, video, film, print media, like newspapers, newsletters, journals, bulletins, leaflets, circulars, and the rest. There are also things like screen medias like slides, your cinema, and also your tours, your exhibitions, your campaigns in terms of the culture involved. These methods put together make up what we refer to as the methods by which information can get to a receiver. The only thing that of interest to us at this point will be what makes a good selection process for the method by which you want to communicate with people. If you want to communicate with people and you need to select a method for communicating, what should come to your mind? Number one, you said it's good to know the properties and the potentials of the strategies. What you select depends on what you can do with it. So if you know the potentials, you know the strategies, you know what you can do with a particular method, it helps you select. Number two, the aim of the communication exercise. What information are you trying to pass across? It's very important when it comes to selecting the method by which you communicate. The level of knowledge, the attitude, the skills of the receiver is very, very important. You do not teach them what is beyond what they know. Most times you bring an extension teaching method, the receivers are more interested or are wowed with the teaching method. They are not even listening to you. They are looking at what you have brought. It could become a distraction. And then number four, we say the ability of the source to use that strategy is also very important. You don't tell yourself you want to use a projector, for example, if you do not know how to operate a projector. So your ability to use the strategy is very important when it comes to selection of the source. Access to the channels needed to use the strategy is also very important. You know, Perhaps I need electricity to power my television. If I want to use television as an extension teaching method, I should ask myself, is there electricity available? And then also, we looked at the availability of the resources to use the strategy. Is it cost effective? Do I have the money? Can I acquire it? Am I able to use it in terms of the cost? And then finally, complementarity of the strategy. Complementarity has to do with the ability to use it in conjunction with other means of communication. Can I use a projector in between? I pause, I speak, I play? The moment I can put two or more teaching methods together, we say they are able to complement each other, and it is better to select methods that complement some others. I'll leave my email with the class. You can drop your comments, your questions on the thread here, or you can send a personal email to me. I'll be willing to respond to your questions if you have any, and then we'll have an interactive class. Thank you, and I appreciate the time you have spent with me in this little space.